I think what we're seeing is a huge rate of improvement in the teams. I mean, if you think they weren't allowed to sail these boats till February, they've probably only had a handful of windy days to practice. And I know what it's like. You don't want to train when it's windy in case you break something and stop yourself, lose a load more training time. So they probably haven't been out that often in these sort of top end conditions. And it was interesting how much better they sailed the boats today. A couple of knots of wind speed less maybe than the other day when it was windy, but a huge difference in the ability to sail the boats and a huge rate of improvement. You heard them speaking at the end of the race as well about how hard it is to jibe, going into the jibe at 40 knots. It's easy to sort of band these numbers around, but until you've actually sat on one of these boats and experienced it, it really is quite something.
Has the racing and the style of racing and the thrills and spills surprised you in this series so far?
Well, I came out here with a very open mind. A big part of me was like, I miss the old America's Cup and traditional sailing, and another big part of me was like, God, it's been fun watching it on television, and isn't this great? And I have to say, since I've been here, it's only ever increased my enthusiasm. The village is great, the atmosphere is great. The racing, I think, is getting closer and closer as the boats are getting more equal. We're seeing more and more sort of what you'd call traditional sailing tactics or manoeuvres, and I think we're in for a real feast over the coming weeks.
I think I'm bound to ask, because obviously you come from that America's Cup monohull background. Could you ever think it was a good idea to go back to that?
I think if you want to be on TV, then you've got to have short races, and if you want to have a number of legs and short races, you've got to go fast. And I think one of the things that's quite clever about these boats is how fast they tack. So unlike traditional catamaran sailing, where there's a huge loss every time you tack, we're seeing them tacking on the foils and staying so close that actually it's opening up new tactics upwind that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise seen. So it is hard to imagine it going back. Even if it was a monohull, it would have to be a fast monohull, potentially even a foiling monohull. Is there really that much difference between a foiling monohull and a foiling multi-hull? So I imagine it's pretty hard to go back. But I'm kind of sad as well. I like seeing spinnakers going up and down. I like sort of understanding more why one boat's going faster than the other. I guess the traditional part of me likes seeing different, the sailors on board and not just 2 or 3 people sailing, a lot of people grinding. So it's
yeah, I mean, for me, I think that watching this racing with the grinders is really, that's boring, having all those people just turning handles or turning pedals, and I think that's a loss, really. But and that's a confection of the rule.
Yeah, in some ways it's cool because it's bringing new physicality into the sport and really making sailing look like the proper physical sport it is. But it's because you can't really see what they're doing when they're grinding. It doesn't maybe make sense to the viewers who don't know the intricacies of one of these boats. So maybe we can do a better job of kind of linking what they're actually doing to what we're seeing on the screens.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, for example, you're taking part in the Volvo race. I mean, you can see the effort. You can get up close and see what it's taking out of the guys, which is a bit difficult when you got your head down.
Yeah, I mean, and the cycling, as you really want the head down. There's guys who can't even see where they're going half the time. But that's kind of cool too, because it's given us some innovation and something to talk about other than all the boats looking the same. So I kind of admire the Team New Zealand for taking that on, and it's also looking like it could be quite effective. So
maybe it's a smart thing. It's a crossover with cycling, which is such a boom sport. Maybe that's another way to look at it.
I don't know. I suspect there's a lot of sailors fearing for their jobs. I mean, that's the tough thing. It's great if you're steering. It's great if you're doing the main sheet. But it's pretty hard work, and of course there's not that many people anyway. So it's a big change in the sport across the board. Even the Volvo Ocean race now, crews are getting smaller. They're going to get even smaller for the next race. So it's tough for young aspiring sailors to maybe see where their future is.
Well, I think you see the fewer jobs for the sailors, fewer jobs as well for naval architects, more jobs for data analysts and computing geeks and so on. So that's a big change.
Yeah, it's a big change. Engineers, and all the hydraulics expert, electronics expert. It's not so much about sort of servicing the winch and doing a bit of rigging. It's a completely changed world.
Good career options, mind you, if you're a boat builder.
Yeah, I think it's also putting different demands on the sailors. I think the need to have for sailors to have a very technical mind. And then you look at some of the young sailors coming through, like Pete Burling would be an example, and maybe needing to have an engineering background and really understand what's going on. It's very different, maybe to where it was 20, 30 years ago.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.